Joining us now to talk more on this is Dr. Jim Mason, the author of Too Hard to Kill, Towards a Fair, Equitable, and Science-Based Equalization Program. In addition to writing for C2C Journal, Dr. Mason has a PhD in experimental nuclear physics and served 37 years with one of Canada's leading defense electronics companies. He joins us now. Dr. Mason, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you very much. Pleased to be here.
So what would you say are the main takeaways from your article in the C2C Journal?
Well, I guess I'd say it's a simpler formula. It's got very simple metrics to use to measure the two things that you mentioned are part of the equalization program that make it very easy to compare the situation across provinces. And it just gives a very reasonable and I think fair and equitable outcome.
And how does that compare to the equalization program that's currently being used?
Well, that's a little bit hard to do because the current equalization program is pretty complicated. They have a very complex formula. But basically what it does is it compares each province to a national average. And everything that's below the national average, any province that's below the national average gets topped up with an equalization payment. Now, there are obviously always going to be provinces below the average. But if you take a more, if you like, holistic view, and look at the comparison between provinces, then you really need to get beyond just the average and look at how they're distributed across the average. With the present approach, you could have a province that's $1 above the average and another that's $1 below the average. And the one that's below the average would get an equalization payment, but the one that's above would not. So what this proposal does is describes a different way of making that reasonably comparable decision that is a standard practice in the sciences, actually, for making exactly that same decision.
All right, Dr. Mason, well, why do you think the formula needs to be changed in the first place?
Well, I think the current formula is generally perceived to be unfair and inequitable by a fairly significant number of the provinces. And it's so complicated that it's really hard to get in there and make it that's going to address these issues. I took the approach that really what to do was go to the constitutional requirements and work from there to devise what I think is clearly a fair, equitable approach that's very simple to understand.
All right. Well, we did mention in October, Alberta held a referendum on this equalization program. Tell us a little bit more about why Alberta held this referendum in the first place and what the federal response to this vote was.
Well, I think you'd really need to ask the people in Alberta why they did it. I don't live in Alberta, but my own impression is that what they really wanted to do was indicate very unambiguously that they don't like the program. They've asked to have it removed from the Constitution, but I think realistically that's unreasonable, never going to happen. But I think they'd be happy if we could change the implementation so that they recognize it as being more fair and equitable.
All right, Doctor, just about a minute left here. But I guess one of the bigger questions would be, is there a realistic way for the federal government to maybe address the concerns of Albertans while also addressing fiscal disparities between provinces?
Well, one of the interesting things that came out of this, excuse me, I worked through an example using the 2017 provincial fiscal data and found, quite surprisingly perhaps, that if you use own source revenue per capita, which is the amount of money that a province would have from its own resources to spend on its public services, there's not a lot of fiscal disparity between the provinces. They're all pretty much the same. And they get that with pretty much the same levels of taxation. So I think this idea that there's a huge fiscal disparity is a bit of an urban myth that's grown up over the years.
All right, Dr. Mason, a quick 30 seconds left here, but where can our viewers go to read your article and find out more about the federal equalization program?
Well, as you mentioned, it's been published on the C2C Journal website. That's C2C with 2 being the number, journal, all one word, .ca. And it's currently the one that seems to come up as soon as you get to the website.